This is Jason Haddix, and you have probably heard of him from all of the different bug bounty content that he has created, including the bug hunter methodology, both the talk and the training. And he's somebody that I looked up to when I first started doing bug bounties, and I finally got him to come on the channel and show us how he managed to make $20,000 in bounties by hacking into a prison.
All right, yeah. So thanks for having me on, and yeah, I think you and I, Ben, have had some mutual success against this target, right? I mean, it's been a good time.
So it
right?
is the same prison, right? I assumed it was the same prison. So for people that are watching this, I did a prison break video on this already on my other series, but also I noticed Jason has hacked this same prison, and I think your approach was completely different, and I think you probably had more access than I did. So I'm dying to see what you did.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that you got invited in the second round. I got invited in the first round, so that's kind of what happened, I think. But I didn't, I got invited. I didn't even see the invite until like a couple weeks in. So hunters had already been on this thing. But anyway, so I'm basically a bug bounty hunter, and I got an invite through this program, and the program was basically a prison technology company, right?
Yeah.
They make technology for prisons, and so it was really interesting to me. And so I found a couple of really great bugs. I ended up making about like all the bugs on this one program about 20K out the door, which was really nice. And that's good spending money and hangout money. And so I thought I'd bring it on redacted. So what I did is basically opened up the the program URL, which was just a landing page, right? So this is the CTF that we're working on today. It's very much like what I landed on is the main company page. And here we have Jab Secure Prisons, and you can mess around with this. This is going through burp, right? So I can check everything that's going on in my HTTP history. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but really just the request to the main page. And if we go back to here, you can see there's like a contact us, which doesn't really go anywhere. There was no real content, and this is a common thing when you're a bug hunter, is landing on pages with very little content. It's like, okay, well, do I just move on from this page, or do I do something else, right? So there's a login button here. I figured this was to log into the administration portion of the software. And so all I got was this login screen, which I didn't have any credentials for, right? This wasn't a credentialed bug bounty where they like give you creds to test the internal of the app, right? So this is all I had, but this did lead me to a subdomain, which was login, which was another asset. And so in the scope of the bug bounty program, they had said that this was in scope, right? And so that was cool. I was going to test normal stuff here, just some injection, like pretty easy stuff, just to see if I could elicit an error. Nothing happened really. But what I did notice is that they had this chatbot down here in the bottom right hand corner. This is pretty indicative of what it was, right? There was like a picture of a very popular prison in the background here, and then they had this chatbot. And I was like, okay, well, like, I wonder, what I can do here. And the first thing I did was send a blind cross-site scripting string here, right? So
naturally,
this was back when, naturally, right? You see a chatbot and you're like, blind cross-site scripting, right? So I did that, and I waited for a little bit, and nothing happened, right? And so, the waiting game with blind XSS, right?
Yeah.
You got to be patient a little bit, right? So, so I waited, but then I went back to kind of my burp later, and I noticed that the chatbot was hosted on a different subdomain. So here you can see store.zeta.ctfio.com, right? And so it was really interesting because this subdomain wasn't in scope for the program, but it was the client's main domain. And so they, what this told me is that, they were hosting this chatbot themselves. It was some kind of open source chatbot that they had downloaded that basically when you ask a question, the chatbot, it basically queued it for them to answer via like email or some kind of backend, right? And so I was really hopeful I'd get blind cross-site scripting here, but I, at this point I noticed, I had everything, the newest stuff on top here in burp. I noticed that, this was another subdomain. So I was like, YOLO, like, I'll check to see what's on this box, right?
So before we jump into the itself, put a scope part of this, I want to quickly talk about the scope part. So with the scope part, you say it's not in scope, but technically it is in scope because they're leveraging this site on the main application, right? So that's kind of like when you always say scope is negotiable because it is leveraging the main side. If you can get something on here that affects the main site, then you probably have some kind of a cool chain.
Yeah, and that was the argument I made in the finding. One of the things I like to tell bug bounty hunters is when I say like scope is negotiable, there's some caveats, right? But
Right.
like when I do a finding that's like this, right? Because I mean, you can see on the main page, the chatbot is embedded on the main
Hmm.
page. It is there. I verified through the HTTP call that it's going to one of their subdomains, or it
Yeah.
was, and all the functionality was handled by them. So it was owned by them. It did have direct access to the application, and it was hosted on the main page. So that's what I told them. I write up in the beginning of the finding, hey, this is why I sent this finding, is because the chatbot's on the front page of your login, and it seems like you guys are hosting this technology yourself, and so that's kind of the preamble I give for the whole finding. Is like this should be in scope because of what you
Yeah.
said, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did you do next? I'm assuming there is some magic that happens with this subdomain.
Yeah, so this subdomain was one of their own subdomains, and they were all I could see was the scripts chatbot.js, right? And so if we go in here and we look at that request, we can see some JavaScript in here, some stuff loading as a constant. We can see there's possibly some stuff in here that we want to look at, but honestly, there wasn't a ton in here that was valuable for me.
Okay.
And so all I had now was this new server, store.zeta.ctio.com, right? This is their website. And so I think what a lot of people gloss over, I liked the episode you did with Corbin because he didn't gloss over it, right? But a lot of really righteous hacks that make a lot of money, the bug hunters will go and they'll talk about the righteous hack they did, like the end part of it where they exploited this super cool thing using this super cool technology. But you and me, having been on the back end of platforms, you see the whole chain and you see the submission, and people really don't talk about like how they found that functionality, and usually it's a form of content discovery.
Yeah.
So that's the next thing I did is as I went to do some content discovery on this domain basically. So I chose to use at the time I was using Pharaohbuster, but basically we're going to use FF today. So if I go here, this is just some FF syntax,
Okay.
and so I'm going to do FF-U, and let's put p :// Oop, need a colon.
Is it HTTP or HTTPS?
So it's S. So we'll add that. So I just added that store.zeta.ctfio.com, and I used a pretty common word list. So in this example, I'm using one list for all short, and I won't melt your servers. I think the entries are at the front of this file. So we'll just run this, and then if we kill this real quick, and we make the text smaller. Here, we'll do it one more time over with the text a little bit smaller. We use this, then we start to get back some stuff, right? So the first thing we do in content discovery is like, oh, okay, well, I have to have a list that I think matches this site. I didn't have any indication on what tech really this chatbot domain was using, but I did find, when I did it live was a var 403, right? So I found a 403 here for a /var folder. And that's interesting to me as a bug hunter, and it should be interesting to you when you're a bug hunter, because what 403 says is that directory is there, but we don't have access to it. And so I knew that I had something here, and so one thing you should do in your content discovery is do recursive content discovery. So what I did here was if I clear this out and you just do like ff-h, right? There's recursive content discovery. There's a flag for it. I think it's just like
Dash
R,
recursive.
I think, or something like
Yeah.
that. Oh, dash recursive. Yeah, there it is. So we can do recursion.
Recursion. Yep.
Yep. And we can add that. And then what that'll do is when it sees something like our URL here, and I'll just show it visually, right? We've found var. It will now fuzz here after it gets a 403, basically. That's what recursion will do. And so, I don't want to melt your server with content discovery, right? Because that list is pretty long. But that's what I did in this case, right? So I found that var folder, I got a 403, and then I ended up recursively brute forcing it with the dash recursion flag. And eventually I landed on a whole bunch of 200s where I landed on some really sensitive stuff. So this was like the really easy part of the bug. And so the first stuff I landed on was stuff inside of this var folder. And at this point, like, it was kind of crazy already. So the things I got hits on were var storage. And so if we go back to the site, we can go to explicitly our chatbot link here. Let's go to burp and grab copy URL. So here's the chatbot JavaScript, right? But if you go var storage, I got this. And so this was crazy to me. And what it immediately told me was that they're using, it's directory listing of a whole bunch of zip files. And I was like, what is this? But the first thing it told me is that they're using this server for more than one thing. They're using it for the chatbot, but they're using it for like a ton of other stuff. And so this was my first bug, right? Was I landed in here in these bunch of these zip files. Now, in the zip files, these were actually server backups. So the source code for the login page and the source code for more functionality of the chatbot and some other code was in here, along with all of the documentation in these zip files. So this was kind of like bug number one, really easy, kind of fell into my lap doing recursive content discovery.
So just to wrap this, like the first part is you see a domain that's technically not in scope, but it's leveraged on the main site. You go after it and you do content discovery. You find a folder. You recursively scan again for content on that folder. It brings you storage. In storage, you have a bunch of zip files. Did you report this on its own with the zip files, or did you do something extra to it too?
No, because I thought that I thought that when I give this to them, right, I want to show some impact. And even though I had some HTML source and it's a vulnerability, it's not quite a crit yet or a P1, right? So,
Yeah.
and when I got back the FBUFs, output for doing the recursive content discovery, there was more paths that I wanted to go into, and many of them had directory indexing on. So I kind of got a feeling that like if I report this and I report other things that are basically the fix for them is going to be remove directory indexing and make these directories not accessible by anyone without authentication. It's
Yeah.
probably going to be all the same bug. So I kept going, looking for more sensitive stuff, basically. I also got a hit on var user photo, which was really interesting, which is not usually like a thing you come across in different types of kind of word lists, but luckily I was using a larger word list, and so it had user photo as one of the entries in the word list. So the recursive brute forcing found this as well. And inside of this was actually, it was a whole directory of mugshots of of intake inmates
Wow.
at different prisons. And so I had their mugshot and their prisoner number and a whole bunch of stuff, which was not great for for this program. So that was the next thing I kind of did.
Okay, so for the zip
Uh,
files, how did you make sense of what they were? Because the folder name, it's just you know something very random, like storage. It could be anything. It could be
yeah,
even photos, for example. How did you make sense
yeah.
of it?
I mean, they were not password protected, so I just opened the zips, right? And inside of the zip was pretty much HTML code. Now this is a CTF, right? So we don't have the HTML in here, but inside of these zip folders was actual like HTML and source code data. Now there wasn't as many of this. There's like a ton here, right, for backups. In my instance, in the real world, there was like I think like 10 or 20 maybe. And so I just did it manually. Now, if I would have wanted to been like super ninja, I just could have written, a wget script
Yeah.
and then recursively unzip them and parse through them with something like trufflehog or get secrets or one of those command line tools that checks for secrets. Um, Now, one thing I think a lot of hunters do when they see something like this, right? And it's just from years of also like, deving an OG web server. Like, we used to
Yeah.
also just zip everything up and put it in a web directory. Right? That's kind of it just kind of came to mind as very OG mentality, right? Of how like a web server admin would do something. But after going in here, I did it manually so I could look through the code with my eyeballs. And this is something that I do like, I think more than a lot of the people want to automate this kind of stuff really quickly. And so if you use like a get secrets or something like that, a lot of those tools are built to find API keys and secrets and passwords. But other stuff that you can find in here is really valuable, like function names that are vulnerable to certain things. You can find the SQL queries for, the login page, which I had in here. It wasn't vulnerable to SQL injection, but I knew for certain once I looked at the source code. And then also you get domain names, in which I found more subdomains for this client inside of these files referenced inside of the source in different places and comments and stuff like that. So these gave me a lot of juicy information when I opened them up.
Okay, so when you see a zip file or a series of zip file, I think it's your next step is usually like looking for secrets. I do something similar. Either I do something like Truffle Hog, or also I go a step further and just feed it to Sneak, because like I
Mhm.
partnered with them a bunch of times and like they gave me access to it,
Yep.
so I can run it through Sneak and see what it finds. It's become like
Yeah.
it's easier then to like manually do it, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I've not had a chance of doing a bunch of these myself, but the few times that I've seen it, those two steps are like, I think something that a lot of beginners actually skip, which kind of sets you aside from maybe a P1 or P2 to a P3 and P4, maybe if you don't go through those, or maybe multiple vulnerabilities that you can find, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, I would say do both ways, right? If you have access to a Sneak, a SemGrep, a Truffle Hog, if you're using any of the open source tools, get secrets. There's a lot of tools that'll look for sensitive stuff in files. Absolutely, when you find backups, run it on that. I run those types of tools even on historical HTML pulled down from, way back,
Yeah.
machine and stuff like that. I run those tools on those things too. But in this case, it was only a few files, and if it's only a few files and it's probably only going to take me 10 or 15 minutes of work, I will actually look at it and open them up and look at the source. And so many times, just reading the source with my eyes has found me the crit rather than just solely basically relying on automation. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean it's an efficiency thing, right? Like you could be efficient
yeah,
and feed some tools to automate your work while you focus on the things that you find valuable.
yeah.
Right, what's next? I know you said you found
Okay,
multiple bugs on this. So what
yeah.
else did you find looking at this person site?
Okay. So another couple of things that hit just from the content discovery, we'll blow through these real quick, is cache user info, which gave me a whole bunch of user info information. We didn't implement that one for this one, but I also got a hit on Dash NAS as well.
Wow.
And this is what kind of gave me a feeling about like what was going on here. Um, and so like once I found this path, NAS, right, I realized kind of what they were doing this server, what they were using the server for. They were using it for everything. Like this is basically their backup server, their NAS for the whole software system.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay, so like they just basically anything that they need to run some bespoke software on, they're running it off of this store.zeta.ctfo.com domain and serving it from there. And so I had a couple other I hit on, which was which offered private, information. Eventually, I found this, which was var doc SQL, and I found an SQL backup in here. And so I grabbed this, and then inside here was kind of a first big hit for me. So inside of this source code file, I found credentials basically for the application and then also for the database in here. So
Wow.
this was a first big kind of finding, at least that proved the sensitive data exposure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming if there's like username and passwords in there, then you could probably leverage it to log in somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was doing everything, and then uh, basically in the cache user info one that we didn't implement for the CTF, but in the cache user info one, if I'm looking at my notes here, was all of the administrator names and hashed passwords for the built-in accounts for the software.
Oof.
And so that was pretty crazy. So that was another hit right away. It was that's sensitive data that shouldn't be out there. And then so like at this point through just content discovery, I had basically hacked. I mean, I basically had like the most private information that they had. But in the NAS one, in var NAS, this directory was kind of the coup de grace of this whole thing. And this was a lot of files. This was like thousands of files. So they had audio recordings of the prisoners
Like
talking
phone
to
calls.
people, like phone calls. Yeah,
Wow.
because when you're in prison, they monitor your phone
Yeah.
calls unless you have client privilege, um,
Yeah, like an attorney or lawyer or
like
something
like
like that.
legal
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, yeah. And so they, in this varnaz directory, they had dumped a whole bunch of M4A files of conversations between prisoners and
Wow.
non-protected calls, which was crazy. I listened to one and then I was like, okay, I'm reporting all of this immediately. So all of this was one finding that I sent through to them, and I was like, there's just a ton of stuff that you have hosted on here that's publicly accessible on this server in these folders, basically. So that was the first finding.
That's wild, dude. I think when I was hacking on this, I was getting the static stuff, if that makes sense. So I was getting
Yeah,
I had access to like photos because you could
yeah,
text through the app too. And I was like, I click on one, I was like, oh my god, this is like someone's actual like inmate's friend's photo that sent them. So just hearing you
yeah,
go, hearing you go on the media side of it, like, oh yeah, I had videos and like the mugshot. I'm like, yeah, I got the pictures and like same thing, like passwords were
yeah,
created in the app that I had access to. So it's just wild to see like the patterns of like mistakes that happen with this
yeah,
application. But the point A to B of getting there was just different between my approach and your approach. It's fucking incredible.
yeah. I remember seeing your second wave and being like, also just you get that feeling like, what did I miss? Like
Oh
I looked at this for a good like 5 or 6 days, right? Like, and like, like how did I miss the stuff that Ben found? And then like, you were probably being like, well, how did I miss all this?
yeah.
Although it was probably gone by the time you were in, but yeah, so I reported this and right away they were like, this is great. This is exactly the kind of stuff we were looking for. They responded really well and they were like, cool, we're going to take all this down. Can you recheck it? The first thing they said to me in the comments of the submission, they were like, can you please make sure to delete all this data off of your machine? And I was like,
Naturally.
yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, yeah. And so then I kind of went into a little bit of more open scope mode where I was like, okay, so I think I've hit all the functionality of this chat server. Like there was no vulnerabilities because I had the source code now, the backups of the source code. There wasn't anything there. There wasn't any hidden endpoints that would give me anything. I definitely read all that, and I was like, okay, well, what else can I do? So while I was doing other things, I basically started to look at GitHub, right? And
Yeah.
so I wanted to see if store.zeta.ctfio.com was referenced anywhere on GitHub, or if login.zeta.ctfio was referenced anywhere on GitHub. And so I started looking, just with some simple GitHub dorking techniques. And when I just did the top level domain, in this case, it would be ctf.io.com on GitHub, I found some source code that was posted by some people. And when I looked through that source code, I found a couple new subdomains. And so one of the ones I found was work LMS. And
Wow.
let's see here, if we paste this here, it was live. So what it was basically an LMS to teach employees of the prison software system how to use the prison software system. And this was really interesting. And so I was like, okay, well, this isn't exactly in scope anymore, but like they've responded pretty well, and let's just check it out. And in my history of web hacking, I've definitely hit on some sensitive stuff being hosted by Moodle, which is the learning management system. And that's what LMS stands
Yeah.
for, a learning management system. I definitely hit some vulns in Moodle before. There's definitely a bunch of CVEs. There's a whole bunch of ways to misconfigure it. There's user enumeration, and I kind of really just wanted to know what was behind this login field. So yeah, so this was kind of the next area I landed. Okay, so the next place I wanted to look was kind of GitHub, and like I had, completely kind of hacked this site, hacked in air quotes, right? I found stuff that they had misconfigured and reported it. But I wanted to find the domain in which, the fictional domain we're using for this example was, this domain was jabprisons.com. And so basically I went to GitHub and I just typed in jabprisons.com in quotes, right? And I found a couple references that developers had put. One basically had a username and password in it already. So if we look at these two, I'm just going to open up a new tabs. Um, there's a reference here. And the first thing I noticed in the reference was they were mentioning that there's a site and it has, they're using Git for, their source code kind of configuration. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. And they're talking about the secret key. And then I can go back to the top level repo, and I can see there's a MySQL backup.sh. And so this was actually how they were creating the MySQL backups, was through the shell script, which was publicly available on GitHub. So this had a new domain in it, which was called worklms.jabprisons.com. And then it was telling this, how this kind of worked. It built these files. And so this was a new subdomain I had never seen before, work LMS, for this program. And I decided, like, hey, it's referenced here, I might as well go give it a shot. It's not explicitly in scope, but they've responded pretty positively to my findings so far. So let's see where it goes. So I found this reference on GitHub, and then I ended up going to it, which was work LMS, and then jabprisons.com. So here we have kind of a representation of what I saw. It was this login, and the first thing I saw was powered by Moodle, which, if you don't know what Moodle is, it's a learning management system. So it's basically like a place where you can upload training and build training modules for different people. And so they had installed Moodle on the server, and they were training people. I found out much later, they were training people on how to use this tech software for all the prisons. And so there was a bunch of sensitive data in here, but I had to find a way to get it out. So I landed on this, and this was kind of the next phase in what I was looking at.
Okay, so when you get to like a Moodle page like this, what is the testing methodology here? Do you look for CVEs? Do you look for like easy passwords that you can guess? Like, what do you
Yeah.
do in this case?
Yeah, so I do a little bit of everything, honestly. So, just from being in tech for a long time, I know that Moodle has had several CVEs, right?
Yeah.
So I could hit this with, a nuclei and just restrict it just to the Moodle CVEs that have existed in the past, maybe 5 years, right? And I definitely did that. So that was one of the things I did. I didn't find anything doing that. And then, so since Moodle is a piece of software, it's an LMS that sits on the server that they've installed, right?
Yeah.
There can be all kinds of configuration issues with the way that they've installed Moodle. And in any word, like anything, like WordPress, or any type of CMS, CRM, LMS, any of these types of software that you have to administer yourself. So I ended up doing the next thing in my methodology was, just looking at the source, seeing if there's anything interesting in here. There wasn't, right? And this is, again, one of the quandaries that a lot of bug hunters have, is they'll land on a site and they'll be like, okay, well, I don't have a password. There's nothing leaked. There's no secrets in the JavaScript code or anything. What do I do? Well, the next thing to do is the same thing I did before, which was content discovery.
Yeah.
And so I ended up running FF on this, and I had seen through the GitHub reference back here that they had referenced, if we go back to MISC, that they had referenced that they were using Git, right? And so I was like, okay, well, maybe they're using Git on this server as well. And so I ended up going through like my hit lists for all of like the files that can basically tell you that someone has Git installed locally on a server. So one of the things you look for when you're looking for Git hosted on a server is you look for .get, and then like kind of another common hit is git.head, which will give you the head of the file. And you can see here, I got a head file for the file. It downloaded up here, and I could open it. And so this indicates that the server is hosting a Git repository. Now, Git repositories on the internet, they can have very structured paths that you can download all the Git objects and all the commit data, which is kind of what we're after. But sometimes it's broken, and so they don't offer the exact Git trees. They just offer the Git objects underneath this. And so there's kind of this amazing tool and blog that exists out in the public by this group called Internet Watch, and they make this repo called Git Tools. And so not only, because there's a lot of tools that'll go out there and they will grab, a very well-structured Git install, but if they've removed the Git head or the .git file, or they've removed some of the tree syntax data in Git, you can't pull down with most of those tools the source code. You can go to their repo here. It's called Git Tools. It's under their repo Internet Watch, and they have a bunch of tools in this directory. One is Finder, one is Dumper, and one is Extractor. And so when you find a file like we did, like a head file that downloads, you can use Dumper, which is, the first step of the methodology. And the reason we would use Dumper is because, and we'd use this tool in specific, is because if the tree syntax for get is broken and they've removed some files for security reasons or something like that, normal get dump tools will not grab everything. It will not grab all the objects or anything like that. This tool doesn't care about any of that. It will recursively just try to grab everything that's in the Git directory, all the data, all of the objects, even if something is malformed. And so it's a really cool tool. I think you've used it in the past before, right, Ben?
Yeah, so I mean, it's first of all, it's incredible to see like a tool that was developed 10 years ago. It still works to this day, and I've done a lot of research on dot files, so not just .git. I've also done .dstore, which is a Mac file with like MacBooks or OS
Yeah.
X, and I've done some really really cool stuff. It's just honestly incredible to think about like they did this research. They did this research 10 years ago, and today we're still seeing these kinds of vulnerabilities, and we can leverage their tool.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is really crazy to me is every time I've found a .get like file via content discovery, it's never been a fully formed way to download the actual objects, and
Yeah.
so I've always had to use this tool. Like 9 times out of 10, I've had to use this tool, which you like you said is 10 years old, right? So
Yeah.
it's crazy.
So first step is
So
you do dumper. I mean, the chain is you do finder, it finds it, dumper to dump it, and then extract it to extract it. We're gonna skip the finder part and go straight to the dumper and have it dump our Git folder.
yeah, absolutely. So if we go here, we can do bash dumper, and then it'll tell us the syntax here. So it just wants the basically URL. So we'll grab that from our browser, hopefully. And this is the base URL for the Git repository, which is .get. And then we have to give it a folder to dump everything into. So I'm just going to call it Moodle, since that's what I know the app is. And this is exactly what I did for this project. And so there it is. It's now downloading pretty much everything it can, and it just skips if it doesn't get like logical data or anything like that. It'll tell you like some objects didn't download, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we're back now after it's kind of run. It takes a little while, especially with a real Git repository with a real code base. It takes a long time to download all the objects that it has access to, right? And you can see in red there was a bunch of objects we couldn't get, but there's also a bunch of objects that we did get. And so now, if you move back a directory, we're going to use their other tool, Extractor, to take the object data and put it into a folder. So if we go bash extractor, we can basically see the usage is just the Git directory, which is Moodle, right? We did a directory that was Moodle, and then now we want to give it a directory to unpack all the objects into. So we have to go one directory up because that's where Moodle was, and then we'll just dump it to this folder, Moodle unpacked. Okay, so we specified where the folder was where the objects we downloaded are. I had to put a // here, and then it was in the dumper folder and the Moodle folder we made, and then we want to put it into a new folder called Moodle.unpacked. So
Yes.
yes, cool.
Gotta love
All
bash
right, so
symbols.
now it's pulling out all the objects and all the source code and files from everything there. We can run the extractor, right? And for a full install of an enterprise level software, you're going to get a lot of source code back. You're going to get repeats of the same repo. You're also going to get committed files to the GitHub repository, not just the Moodle software. And so this is going to run for a long time. In fact, it's been, we've tried to cut it out. It's a long section of pulling down source. And so eventually you can see on the left-hand side, I have full source code for this application, as well as eventually I had access to a whole bunch of really sensitive files. So inside of the files that were committed just at the root were a full database dump of this software, private SSL keys for the domain itself, admin session files that I could use to log into that were backed up via logs, and then also I have all the source code for the Moodle install, as well as all the content which is stored in the database as well for everything like that, and all the files that were uploaded to the training platform. And eventually I was able to look for all those files and see how the software worked, which helped me later on in the test. So that was kind of the process for basically pulling down all the Git objects and all the source code on that server, which led me to other stuff.
So yeah, if you're watching this, don't cancel this process. If it takes too long, go on a walk, go play some video games, something.
Yeah.
Don't cancel this
Yeah.
because it's going to give you the more, once it finishes, it's going to give you the whole source code for it. And this is also a good learning lesson for a lot of people because I know of a few new bug hunters that I've noticed that have reported the .git folder without actually reversing it and getting the source code. So if you see a .git folder, run it through this tool. It is always worth having the source code because you can also show that, hey, .git folder is there. It's cool, but you also have the source code for this thing. And as a bug hunter, you can leverage that to find more vulnerabilities, whether it's SQL injection, whether it's file uploads, on-auth endpoints, and things like that. So keep that in mind when you come across a .git folder. Okay, if you're watching this, we're going to cancel this. You shouldn't cancel it, and you should actually go look for the flag within this files and see what other vulnerabilities you find.